Thank you for coming out. Thank you for the Navajo Project for inviting me to present on this, uh, which is convenient because we just had a publication come out from the university on this exact topic. So fresh on my mind, and with management planning being in its peak right now, I think a lot of people are looking to use this kind of things in their upcoming management objectives. So again, I'm Casey Spackman. I'm the Extension Range Specialist in Las Cruces. That's where I'm doing this presentation out of tonight. And so I'm going to jump right into it. So estimating carrying capacity on rangelands. And please feel free to throw questions or anything that you might have issues with, throw it in the chat, and we'll address those as I go through the presentation. So there's an important distinction that I need you to make note of. So we're talking about carrying capacity, but there's often confusion when it comes to carrying capacity and stocking rate. So the definition of carrying capacity is all animals that are on that landscape, how the environment can support them, and they can use the vegetation, soil, and water sustainably. Versus stocking rate is strictly livestock. Okay, that could be any species of livestock, cows, sheep, horses, anything like that. That is considered a stocking rate. When you combine a stocking rate with any other animal, such as wildlife, then all of a sudden you change the term into carrying capacity. So we'll dive into that a little bit, and I will tell you the main differences between those two things in your critical things in estimating a carrying capacity and stocking rate. And I'll try to make that clear in that distinction. So the first thing you need to do with any of this estimation is you need to go about it with an objective. What's your objective? So most people, the focus is livestock. Well, if the focus is livestock, then you're dealing with stocking rate, not a carrying capacity. But oftentimes there's other things that we want to work into our plans on the ranches, and a big one is the wildlife. So once again, once we start dealing with wildlife, we transition into carrying capacity. So distinguishing those two. Maybe you're not running animals and you just want to look at the plants, increasing plant species, diversity, things like that. That might be an objective in calculating a carrying capacity. Maybe you just want to care for the environment. You've got places that are looking pretty rough, susceptible to erosion, and you're trying to improve those. Another push that is becoming a big, I wouldn't call it an issue, but it's becoming a topic that needs to be focused on is aesthetics. So that's just a fancy word for saying recreation. Hikers, four-wheelers, horseback riding, things like that. Socio-environmental health is a fancy term for it. So just looking at the aesthetics, is it pretty? Is it rough looking? Things like that. So depending on what your focus is, meaning what your objective is, will dictate what you do with the calculations you come out with. So you always want to have a management objective going into estimating a carrying capacity. So when we're talking about estimating carrying capacity or stocking rate, there are 4 fundamental items of information that you need before you can do any sort of calculations. These are the 4 basics. If you take nothing else away from this, this would be the slide that you can stick in your back pocket and work with it. So how much forage do you have? How big is the area that you're assessing? How much are you going to allow the animals to consume? So we often refer to that as an animal allocation or utilization. Utilization tends to be the end of year estimate after it's been the forage has been removed, but the percentages are still there. So how much food does an animal eat? Which is an interesting question, because most of the time people don't know that question. So when I go into my kids' grade school and talk about my job, the majority of the students there do not know how much food an animal will eat. But it's an important thing in order to estimate that. So the equation there for estimating carrying capacity or stocking rate is, well, it's at the bottom there. But you combine number 1 and 2 to get total available forage. So you just multiply how many pounds you've got of grasses or forbs and times it by the size of the pasture or rangeland, and that'll give you total available forage, and you can plug that in. So you can plug in each one of these into the equation. And that's why I say this is a key slide. So, all right. So let's dive into each one of those and kind of dissect them before we get into the fun part of it, right? Doing the math. I emphasize this, monitoring. How do you know how much forage? How do you know how much forage you have? It comes down to monitoring. So if you're not monitoring, if you're not collecting samples, you don't know. Now with carrying capacity and stocking rate equations, it has to be quantitative, meaning you have to have numbers. So you can't just look and say, well, I've got a good enough amount of feed for my animals. No, we have to have numbers. And in order to do that, you've got to go out and monitor and collect samples. So two key concepts with forage availability. So there's a difference between residual forage and annual forage or caged forage. So residual forage is not protected from other grazers, other consumers. It is just out there. And so anytime you take clipping, for instance, if you clip it and weigh it, which is the common method, and there's no protection around it, that's residual forage because you have no idea what other consumers, I call them consumers because there's quite a few different aspects of that I'll get into here in a minute. You don't know what consumers have taken from that landscape. And so it's how much is there at that specific time point. Now, annual forage or caged forage, that is a protected plot that larger animals cannot get into. And so you're taking into account the majority of the consumption of that feed or forage, and therefore you have a better idea of what the total carrying capacity is for the whole season, rather than residual forage is only for a specific time frame. So how do you estimate that? That picture there does a good job. You've got to get out, use some sort of ring or square of a known dimension, and you got to cut all that feed, put it in a bag, dry it out, and weigh it. So I will make note that if you're wondering about the process of that, we also have a pub out on that through NMSU. It's I think called annotated RAM monitoring on rangelands, and that goes through the specific specific steps you take to collect that forage. But essentially, you clip it to the ground, collect all of that within the, for a hoop, the circumference of that hoop, put it in a bag, dry it, and weigh it. And this is the unique thing, converting it, because the target for conversion is, if we go back to the equation, right? We're dealing with pounds. How much forage do you have? We have pounds in a specific area, which is acres for total available forage. So we need to somehow convert whatever weight is in those bags. I guarantee it's not going to be pounds, to pounds per acre. And so that's where this conversion factor comes in. So what you do is you take everything within that circumference or whatever you got in your bag. So let's say you have 5 grams of forage in that bag. And let's say we're using a 3.5 foot circumference hoop. You times it by 100. So that's your conversion factor. And that's what this slide is displaying there in table 1. So essentially you have 500 pounds of forage. Very simple conversion. If you have 10 grams, that's 1,000 pounds. It's really easy to convert those things. And depending on the hoop size, you'll use a different conversion factor. So a key thing about collecting the amount of forage is you've got to be really, really careful in your site selection, because not all range is created equal. You're going to have more grass over here, less grass over here, more bare ground, more forbs, more brush. So you've got to do a little bit of an art, a little bit of a judgment on where you select these areas. So keep in mind they should be representative. Some general guidelines for your assessments is keep it 1/4 mile away from water. Another one is don't do it on steep slopes. That's not representative. So anything less than 15 degrees is considered okay for taking samples. Don't take samples from small areas. So if you've only got a backyard pasture, that's not going to be representative of, say, a pasture greater than 5 acres. I would say, 20 to thousands of acres is more appropriate for using the stocking rate equation. Because in reality, we're going pounds of forage per acre. And so we're trying to get how many animals we can run on that acreage. So let's determine acreage. So I want to have you note comparing grazable acres versus actual acres. So here's a satellite image of a particular pasture that I work heavily with. And if you look at it, it looks flat in this picture, but is it really flat? And is everything on that map grazable? The answer is no. So we're taking into consider water and we're taking into consider slope. And in this particular one, we're taking into consideration tree cover because this is on one of the forests. So how much of that is considered grazable acres versus actual acres? Only 67% of that. So you can see that red. That's the only grazable spots in that whole pasture. So you have to be careful when you're doing the calculations and know the difference between actual acres and grazable acres. Because if you do actual acres, you're going to have less animals. And if you have grazable acres, you possibly, or reverse of that. If you have actual acres, you're going to run more acres, but there's less forage than you predicted, and therefore you're going to overgraze. If you use grazable acres, then you're more accurate with that, and you're more likely to hit your allocation or use target. So be aware of the difference between grazable acres versus actual acres. Something to note here. Different species graze differently. So this model here that I'm showing you is for cattle. Sheep, they can climb steeper terrain, and so they can get to the steeper terrain of grasses. Horses, they're more flatlanders. Cattle, they're kind of a halfway between sheep and horses. So we have to be aware of the different animals. How about wildlife on this? Well, can you confine the wildlife to a specific pasture? The answer is no, they're free ranging. And so that comes into a whole different calculation with grazing, grazable acres, and it's, or not grazable acres, with carrying capacity. And it is something that is what I would call an educated guess, because you don't know if they're going to be within that. So with carrying capacity, you have to use really large acres for wildlife. All right, so like I said, there's some reductions that need to occur, actual acres and reductions to grazable acres. So we have distance from water. So this is for cattle. There's a little bit, I'll refer you to Holocheck, Principles of Grazing Management for details on other grazing animals. But for cattle, anything under a mile, there's no reductions from water, because water is a limiting factor in New Mexico. Slope, not so much. We have a few forests, but the majority of it's going to be water. 1 to 2 miles, just reduce their consumption by about 50%. And then over 2 miles, likely not going to be consumed. And these have a gray area. Don't think of them as absolute values. Think of them as a gradient against a ruler. They can overlap some. So don't think that you can go 1.5 miles would be 25% reduction. That's not the point to this. It just gives you a general estimate. Same with slopes. So 0 to 10, 11 to 30. These are also on a gradient per se. So use those with knowledge that they're an estimate and there's some wiggle room there for these reductions. So the next topic. So we've gone over how much forage we have. We've gone over what size of pasture are we looking at. Now, let's talk about how much you will allocate to the animals you have selected. So using the utilization guideline, I emphasize guideline. So light to no use grazing is 0 to 30%, conservative 31 to 40%, moderate to 41 to 50%. Now, the majority of New Mexico is a year-long grazing strategy. And so conservative grazing in that system would be the emphasis. Sometimes we get into the moderate, but we try to stay conservative. If you do heavy grazing consistently in a continual grazing system, then that's where you're going to run into problems. But keep in mind that at 1 year of heavy grazing, followed by rest or light grazing, will likely have no impact on the range. And then you've got severe. Now we look at these grazing categories as you can look at them in a continual grazing system where they're free range, have a lot of area. However, when we look at them in a confined or intensive grazing system, that kind of stuff goes out the window. And that's where you can graze severe, you can graze heavy, but it comes down to in and out times. So basically the duration of how long you're on the pasture. So, but for a continuous grazing system, We use conservative grazing, which is between 31 and 40%. And so the general idea there is we graze at 35%. So that's kind of the target we want to shoot for in the equations I'm going to show you tonight. But that's a judgment call on your grazing capacity estimates. You will determine what's appropriate for your pasture depending on your timing, your intensity, and your duration in those pastures. So here's what I show the kids in my my kids' school. This is how much animals eat. So we do it on a dry matter intake in pounds per day. So a cow, a mature cow, 20 pounds per day of dry forage they eat on rangelands. That can vary. That can go up to 30 pounds or be as low as 10 pounds, depending on the situation of the animal, the environment, just what's going on around them and what's going on with them. But you can see these are all based off of a cow. So the cow is the model, the cow is the standard. So anything off of that is just a prediction of body weight and their similarity to a cow in their digestive system. So essentially, a cow will consume about 2% of its body weight daily. All right, so we are just over 20 minutes into this. And so now the fun part comes. So we're going to put all of those things into play that we talked about and give you a few examples. I've got 4 examples for you to work through. So there's going to be some pause time. So if you would break out your paper, break out your pencil, keep this equation in mind. But yeah, so go ahead. So we've got a 20,000 acre ranch that produces 550 pounds of forage annually per acre and has a desired utilization of 35%. So what we're trying to get at is how many cows can we run in a year-long grazing system? So I've given you some key information. So we need to come up with total available forage. We've got percent utilization there, which is 35%. We need to know the animal forage demand for a cow. You remember that table, which will give you an animal unit equivalent or the amount of cows you can run on that landscape. So go ahead and take a minute. And when I mean just a minute, it's literally just a minute to calculate those out. And then I'll continue on and show you some answers. All right, so if you want, you can throw some guesses in the chat and see if you got it right. But we're gonna move on. Keep that in mind for some of these other calculations as we go on. So let's just look at the end number right now. Okay, so we've got 527 cows or animal units. How did we do that? So 20,000 acres, 550 pounds gives us 1,100 pounds of total available forage. So we can plug that into the equation, which is 1,100. 35% utilization right here, plug it into the equation. Divided by how much a cow can eat. Well, they eat 20 pounds per day. We're in a year-long system, 365 days. One cow will consume 7,300 pounds a year. So you divide the total available forage or available forage, right, Divide that by 7,300 pounds, gives you your animal unit equivalent. All right, so we're going to jump to grazable acres. Remember talking about that? Only 75% of the ranch is grazable. So how many cows do you have now? So go ahead and calculate that out. If you want, you can go ahead and put it in the chat. Yes.
This looks very interesting, but I don't have a calculator nearby.
Okay.
So I'm struggling here. So I just wanted to let you know, I said, wow, this is so interesting. But I just wanted to use a calculator so I can have some experience to walk myself through to get the results. So I'm just scrounging around for a calculator, but it's very interesting. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. All right, so you remember the last one, 527 cows. So if we continue on with that, so there's only a few things that we're changing, right? And those are marked in red. So 75% of the ranch. So we've got to take the 20,000 total acres of the ranch, times it by 75, because that's all that's available. And then we times it by the 550 pounds, which gives us 8 million pounds of total available forage. So if you remember, if we go back, we went from 11 million pounds of total available forage to 75% of that, which is just over 8 million. Seems like a lot, but it's not that much when you're dealing with a full year of food for a cow. So going on, we still have the 7,300 pounds a year per cow. So you times the plugging all these things back into the equation, the new total available forage times the 35% utilization. We divide that by consumption per year. We've got 395 cows. So if you remember, we went from 527 to 395, all because of grazable acres. So you can imagine what would happen if we ran 527 cows instead of the 395 on our pasture, and what that would do to the vegetation impacts. All right, we're definitely going to overuse the pasture. So that's why this is where I emphasize that grazable acres is very important. Yes, Mel, go ahead.
Yeah, Casey. Kind of a simpler way to do it as well too is just the 527 and the AUMs or the AUL, and just subtract 75%, gives you 395 as well. It's what I usually do. I do this on my range pretty quickly.
You mean like I just did? So you're getting ahead of me, Mel. That was my next slide.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, you're all right. You're exactly right. So the simplest way to do this is to just go 527 cows times 75% is 395 cows. And you can do those adjustments for acreage easily, but we run into problems later if you try and do some of these calculations like that. So the reason I'm setting the stage of making sure that you do the acres first is because sometimes we get lost in the latter part when we do calculations and give us the wrong numbers. But this particular scenario, yes, all you have to do is you have to times your animal units by 75% will give you your new number. Or timesing that by whatever the other reduction factors are. So let's say the 75% was slope. We had a 75% reduction for slope. or 25% reduction, because 75% is grazable. What would you do if you had which one would you use if you had a 15% reduction for water? So you've got these two equations, right? You calculated reductions for slope, and you had a reduction for water. Slope is 25%, water is 15%. Which one do you use? Or do you combine them and say, well, 25 and 15, right? No, you take the biggest reduction. They are not additive. So I just want to be clear about that. You would only you calculate them separate. Water is separate, slope is separate. You calculate them individually, and then you take the greatest one, because that's going to be your greatest reduction, and that's what you apply to the equation. You don't do any sort of additive or complex math on this. It's either one or the other. So just want to be clear, because I have seen management plans and other issues come about because they used an additive effect of slope and water and tree canopy cover. That's not the case. It's either one or the other. You can't combine these two. So. All right. So using the same equation, what if we changed our grazing strategy? Let's say we have pastures now that we can rotate through. Okay, let's something like a savory model, right? So we're going to do a 30-day intensive rest rotation type grazing strategy. So you want to know how many cows you can run for 30 days in one of these pastures before you rotate. So how does that play into this equation with all of these animal units? So go ahead. How would you put 30 days into the equation? Because we were doing 365 with your calculations. And I think this is where we're going to get to what Mel was talking about with Mel and Cody. Sorry, it was Cody, right?
Yeah, Mel's fine.
This is where we're going to get into what Cody was talking about with the equation and just getting the AU and then doing calculations off from the animal units. It only works for acreage reductions. You remember the old equations? Let's jump back here. So 365 days. Can you find that in the equation? I turned off my laser pointer. So 365 days here. So we're dealing with animal demand when we're going with this. So if we go back to this one, you can see where I've substituted 365 days for 30 days, gives us a new amount of consumption or demand by the animals. And so now we plug that into the equation, and now look how many animals we have, animal units. But interesting enough, this changes what we call the animal unit. This is now, if you noticed on the other ones, it was an AUY, which means that's an animal unit equivalent year. This one is an animal unit equivalent month. So I picked 30 days specifically because that's an animal unit month. So instead of running 395 cows all year, we can run 4,812.5 cows on that one pasture for 1 month. Now, I did this on purpose. 48 or 4,812.5. Can you have a half a cow running around in your pasture? No. So what do you do with that half a cow? You round up or you round down? You always round down. So you're not going to go 4813 you're going to go 4,812 head. All right. Now to Cody's topic. There is no alternative to this. So I should have showed you the calculations. So a month, right? So if we were to just divide the our old, so if we were to divide or times 395 times 12 months, right? Because 12 months in a year, well, it doesn't work. You'd get somewhere around 4,700 head, not 48. So that's where you've got to be careful. And it comes down to just the rounding area error, right? Because we're talking about 30 days. Well, we got February with 28, we've got other months with 31. And so when you start adding those in, it doesn't equate right. So it's not as simple as just timesing that year-long stocking rate by 12. You're going to be off quite a bit. And when you're talking about 100 head of cows, yeah, that's a pretty good amount of money. So I don't think you want to make that calculation error. So that's why I always double check my work and go back and put it into the actual equation rather than just working with the animal units. So does that make sense, Cody?
Absolutely. I agree. I concur.
So thanks for that. Thanks for that catch, Cody. Appreciate it. All right. So the final one for tonight. What if you wanted, let's say you're on that rotational grazing, so you're using timing, intensity, and distribution duration type scenario. You're considering those. You're going to go in early. You're going to graze for a month and then rest it the rest of the year. So technically, in that kind of grazing system, you can graze heavy as long as it has adequate rest to grow back. So that's what I'm talking about here. We want a 50% utilization this time because of the timing we're going in on that rotational strategy. So what would how many cows could you put on there if you substitute 35% for 50% utilization? So where would you plug that into the equation to get your numbers? And then let's see what we've got for an answer on that. So we went from 4,800 cows to almost 6,900. So 6,875 AUMs or cows. So you can see where I substituted that into the equation from the last one. So we had 35 there in the equation. You just substitute it for 50, and it gives you your AUMs. Now, you'll notice as we've gone through these equations, they kind of added on to themselves. That's not going to be the case on most of your stocking rate equations. So, but I just wanted to build upon this and give you different scenarios so you could adjust the numbers. And you can, if you're good at your algebraic equations, you can manipulate this and change sides. And one thing that we're working on right now is called physiological constraint of grazing animals in a multi-grazing scenario. So basically, we know how much a cow eats. We do not know how much the wildlife eat. And so you can rearrange this equation to get use or utilization of just the cows or a general estimate of that. Yes, there's going to be some error there, but yeah, so you can rearrange this equation and plug in different things, and it just depends on what your objective is when you're using this equation. All right, so decision making. This is an important part of your carrying capacity and stocking rate calculations. So just to summarize, there are some inherent errors with clipping within cages. So they catch the moisture, they provide windbreak, they provide perches for animals, which can put droppings in the cage and add fertilization. And so there's some issues there. So your cages, from my experience clipping, they tend to overestimate what the actual production is. So those annual cages. So there's also inherent errors with clipping in general if you don't choose or select your sites that represent the landscape, because you're just taking a subsample of the whole. We don't have time to go out and doing a clipping of the whole pasture. Most of the time we can't mow the whole pasture. But the more clippings you take, the closer to that available forage you can get. But you have to be representative, so keep that in mind, or your numbers don't tell you anything. I talked about this within in the slides, being conscious of timing, intensity, distribution, and duration of your grazing animals. So depending on what your strategy is with these different things will depend on what you do with the numbers and how they come out in the end of the year or the end of the month, whenever your grazing duration is. I emphasize that utilization is a guide. It's not a set threshold. So for instance, you set it at 35 and you graze 42, that's not a big deal. It's kind of a guideline. So don't think that just because you hit 35, you need to get the cows out of there immediately. It's not that way. There's some wiggle room, and with these inherent errors that I talk about, the utilization has that wiggle room and is not a set threshold. So when you're doing your calculations and your animals are out there grazing, so this is after you've done your calculations, beware of other, what I would call uncontrolled grazers. So I call them uncontrolled. I don't call them wildlife, but uncontrolled grazers with your livestock. This could be elk. This could be rabbits. This could be grasshoppers. This could be general deterioration with hot temperatures, lack of precipitation. There's a lot of different things that can influence how much forage is removed in the given time when you're on a pasture. So just be aware of that you may set your allocation to 35, but then you go out halfway through your season and see that you've already hit 35. There may be some other factors in play there. Also, I emphasize this to the ranchers and producers. You are the professional. You know if you can run 4,800 head for a month in that pasture. If that seems outrageous, it likely is. If you've never been able to do that before, it's likely not an accurate number. And so we've got to come back to these inherent errors and figure out, okay, was it our measurements? What was it that caused us to have that high a number? So be cautious when you're using this. Use professional judgment or professional experience and judgment when it comes to setting these stocking rates. So if you want to read all the stuff that I went over tonight is in this new pub that I talked about in the beginning, Estimating Carrying Capacity on Rangelands. It's free. You can access it online. If you've got your phone and the monitor, you can scan that QR code. It'll take you right to it and give you some reading. Cody, did you have a question?
No, I'm just kind of going in and out of signal here, so I think I inadvertently touched the
Okay.
unmute button, so I'm good.
All right. Okay, so the last and final thing before, well, I can take questions while you're doing this is, if you have a chance, please take a brief survey for us. This gives us feedback on how effective this was, if you learned anything, which also supports extension in being able to fund putting on these programs. So if you wouldn't mind taking that survey and let us know what your thoughts were. So I appreciate it. Do we have any questions? You guys are free to unmute yourselves and to ask me anything you want, and I can go back through some things for the next 5 or 10 minutes.
So Casey, you do have a question from one of the folks in the chat box, Renee. I
Okay.
believe some folks are using their phones to watch this webinar, so therefore cannot scan the QR code. So she was
Okay.
asking if you can provide a link for your survey.
Yes, I can. If I can figure
Well,
out real quick how to do this.
Okay. While you do that, I do have a question.
Yes.
So for those that are, well, first off and foremost, what type of like range monitoring will you recommend for producers to begin with for their very first time? Is this something that you recommend for them as more of like a rancher's guide to range monitoring, or is there other methods that they can use?
A rancher's guide, once again, I go back to that beginning comment that it depends on their objective.
Mm-hmm.
If they're just generally starting and they're not looking at stocking rates. So if you're doing stocking rates or carrying capacity, you have to go out and clip. So it's called a paired plot or caged plot. So you'll need to go out and clip that. But if you're just doing monitoring in general and you're just getting started, the fastest and easiest way to do that is take pictures. Make sure you date those pictures, but yeah, just take pictures of the rangeland and then keep track of those photos, and you can start developing trends. If you start getting into some more intensive stuff, we push the rapid assessment methodology just because it's easier for producers, but that is simply just one monitoring method out there. There's lots of them.
Okay. All right. So it just all comes down to the producer's objective.
Yes.
Okay. And another one would be, as far as like this one's from based on your point of view, do you find any rangeland monitoring apps that you find making collecting data easier?
Say that again, sorry.
Rangeland monitoring apps for those that are kind of tech savvy and maybe want to take it another step further. What type of like monitoring apps, rangeland monitoring apps would you recommend for those that make collecting data easier?
I wouldn't call it a phone app. As far as quick phone apps, I don't have any suggestions there for those watching. But you can use the USDA's range analysis platform, which is a satellite-based system that you can do those assessments with. But given they have their limitations, there's pros and cons to it.
Okay. All right. Another question that came from Renee was that all this was great information. It would be great to have an online calculator to plug in. Is there a site?
So the range analysis platform, once you get it in there, the production analysis gives you a basic estimate. I believe you can just Google SRM, I think, has one. The range. I'm forgetting their names right now. Sorry, I forgot their name. They have a website that has a calculator on it and a bunch of other information to help out.
Okay. All right. There was a person that raised their hand in the Mel, did you have a question or was that during the middle of the presentation? I believe Mr. Begay was next.
No,
Is that-
Mr. Begay, he can go. I just put my comment in the chat, so I'll leave it at
Okay.
that.
Okay, thanks, Mel. All right, Mr. Begay.
Bijit Ba,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ba being for women. I had a question because this is through you're in partnership with Navajo Nation Department of Ag, correct?
We're not in partner with them, but I mean, like, we're definitely share their information as much as possible because they're very on a high platform, across the reservation, and a lot of producers are well aware of their programs, such as the AIF program. So we try to work with them and collaborate them and to push all that information through. So
Okay. My question, it's maybe all over the place, so just bear with me while I try to sort through it. When working on the Navajo Nation, because we have carrying capacity regulations, right? On Navajo, depending on where you are on the reservation, you might be subject to the Blue Book or the Red Book. When you look inside either of those books, it's based on sheep units. So when we go back to Bureau of Indian Affairs carrying capacity regulations, it states that carrying capacity shall be stated in terms of sheep units year-long in the ratio of horses, mules, and burros 1:5, right? So if you read through the language, what I'm trying to understand is there's best practice. And best practice says you should be looking at the carrying capacity, right? And when we look at BLM land, that's what they're doing. So I'm wondering if the way that we're going about it, right? Because we want to increase the carrying capacity, if we're misunderstanding the language by looking at just our sheep units. Because when I read through the regulations, it's talking about carrying capacity.
Yes. So stocking rate is going to be a percentage of carrying capacity.
So the permits that are issued, it's stated in terms of sheep units. So that those sheep units could fluctuate essentially then with respect to the carrying capacity.
Yes.
Okay, so fixed, I just don't understand where the fixed numbers come from, because some permits have like 10 sheep units, right?
Yeah.
But their carrying capacity is much higher.
Yes. So to give you an example, I know the federal agencies, Forest Service, BLM, they generally do a NEPA analysis every 10 years that will estimate that carrying capacity. And so that's their threshold for the next 10 years that they base everything off from.
Okay, so the stock, I'm sorry, the stock, what is it called?
Stocking rate.
The stocking rate was that just an oversimplification of the carrying capacity at the time, or?
No, stocking rate is just so because their analyses have to take in all grazing species. So when they, let's say, for the Federal Service, they have an allotment. They go off of that carrying capacity for a percentage that the livestock can use. That percentage is called a stocking rate from the carrying capacity. And usually they give it a range. They give it a ceiling, right? But every year they're adjusting those numbers. They're not fixed based on what the rangeland conditions are. However, the carrying capacity is fixed because of certain analyses that go on. Because it's really intensive to put together those carrying capacity analyses. It's not just simplified like I did today. Mine was very simple and straightforward for producers and mostly geared towards stocking rates. Carrying capacity is a whole different a bear when it comes to calculations.
Because I remember way back when BIA used to come out and do a proper assessment of the carrying capacity, and I haven't seen that done in a while. Is the extension office able to do that?
We generally we can consult and assist, but we generally do not do the heavy lifting on those kind of things.
Is
So
there a entity that does do that, that comes out and does an assessment?
you can get a private company to do it, but I would suggest you really work with BIA and have them either contact us and we will help assist with their carrying capacity estimates as far as they collect the information and we help develop the report. But as far as on the ground stuff, we are really, really limited in extension because for me, I cover the whole state of New Mexico. And so I have a lot of, if I tried doing that for every producer, that would be my full-time job, is just going around and doing that. So unfortunately, I can't do all the groundwork, but I can answer phone calls and help write up plans based on somebody else's collection of data.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your presentation and your time and answering my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Renee. With that being said, we kind of went over our time frame, but that's okay because this is a lot of great information that Casey have presented us today. Please take his survey. If you guys are streaming in from your laptop and you have your phones right by you, do scan that QR code for him and give them your survey. I did send out another survey as well on my end, so if I can have all of you fill that out for me, I would greatly appreciate it. And this is a lot of information. I understand that. And if you guys are wanting to dive more into rangeland monitoring that Casey has, is the RAM, which is the Rapid Assessment Methodology. Oh my gosh, it's in there. But the RAM.
Yes.
If
We'll
you
just call
guys-
it RAM.
yeah, I'm just gonna call it RAM from now on. I'm gonna make a fool out of myself. But if you guys are interested in learning more about the RAM assessment, definitely Casey would be minding if he could come back and kind of take a deeper dive into that. I would greatly appreciate it. But if you guys are interested in that, do let us know in the comment section. I would really appreciate it. That gives me kind of an overview of how many folks on here would want to improve their rangeland monitoring methods. Maybe take it a step further from taking pictures and such. And if you want to dive deeper into the RAM, definitely let me know. And I just want to say thank you, Renee, for sharing all those links on there. A lot of great questions that you had. And definitely if it's something that I see it's necessary for BIA to share how they got to the carrying capacity and maybe share some sort of math behind that and how they got to that carrying capacity. So that's pretty interesting. I'm really happy that you brought that up, and that's something, BIA should actually present later down the road for us to kind of get a visual of how they're implementing that carrying capacity. So thank you for that question. I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for coming on here. And it's really great to see that a lot of people are interested in this, and I know it's very important for those that are continuing on the tradition of taking over their parents and grandparents' lease and grazing permits. Y'all are really wanting to learn more about grazing or rangeland monitoring. So this is very great news to see and hear that you guys are all on here and you guys want to learn more. Like I said again, if you guys are interested in the rangeland monitoring, let me know, and then I'm sure we can fix something up later down the road. So with that being said, Casey, you're more than welcome to stick around. This is the end of our presentation today, and we're just going to go ahead and discuss more of our upcoming workshops and webinars. Okay.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to take off for the night. I appreciate being able to be here.
Thank you, Casey. Have a good night.
Thank you, Casey.
Okay, so I'm hoping that my screen is shared. Let me know. I have two monitors, so one showing split screen and one showing it's basically one screen. Actually, I believe it is split screen. Okay. I'm not quite sure. See, let's swap. All right. Okay, so now it's working. Great. So let's see, well, just to let you guys know that we do have a herd health and record keeping workshop that's being held on February 15th. This is going to be presented by the NSA Project and Dene College Land Grant. This one's going to take place at Clibateau chapter, and it's going to be starting at 10 o'clock and roughly in around about 12 o'clock. So that's one of our events, and we also, that's my apologies. So the first event is taking place on February 15th. And we also have a soils basic mini workshop. We just got, or well, one is starting up tomorrow at Gutty Ahe chapter, which is in Shiprock. And we do have another mini workshop, but this one's going to be on soil texture classification. So a lot of hands-on. They're going to do a soil jar test results. They're going to interpret your soil percentage content using the soil pyramid chart and the NPK test for farm soil or garden soil and your pH level as well. So I've actually attended one of these last month, and it's very great if you're interested and if your kids are interested wanting to learn more about the family soil in their garden. They're more than willing to take probably a heaping mound of soil and take it over to the Dene College. I believe it's at Gutty Ahe chapter. My mistake. And it seems like you do have to register. So if you guys want to click or scan that QR code right there, I'm sure they'll still welcome you. If you don't register, I'm sure there's a sign-in sheet there. So this one's on February 16th from 10 to 12, and it's going to be at Gutty Ahe chapter. And the contact person to get in touch with would be Beverly. She's the Dene College Land Grant extension agent. So her contact information is there, her cell number and her email, and as well as the intern's email as well. We also have other workshops and webinars in line for the month of February, but I just shared with you the 2 weeks of what we have. We will have another webinar 2 weeks ahead and on the 20th, and that one's going to be on the USDA Agribility Project. You may want to stay tuned for that because that's very interesting. Like I said, we do have a website up and running, so if you want to go on there and check us out, learn more about who's on the team, and as well as our upcoming events. You see on the right-hand corner, that's how our upcoming events format will look. Obviously, this was dated back in 2023, so I'll update that for you guys. And our newsletter content's on there, USDA program directories on there. Our conservation planning program is on there as well. But otherwise, from the beginning, I kind of briefly talked about the conservation planning program. If you are interested, we do this for free. We have NSA project provides technical assistance for ranchers and farmers for conservation, building a basic conservation plan. Whether you are a farmer or a rancher, we work with you in developing a plan and either in a group setting or we have technicians that will call you and meet with you individually if that's something that you're interested in. So if you guys are interested in requesting a workshop ahead of time and wanting to know more about our conservation planning program, please email us at nsaproject@nmsu.edu. So we're always happy to help you out. Other than that, we're located on Facebook. We have a YouTube channel where all of our webinars are shared. And we don't do monthly newsletters. We do bi-monthly newsletters. So my name is there. My name is right there if you want to get in touch with me. We are always taking workshops both in northern and eastern. And so if you are in eastern and you're a land board, grazing official, and perhaps you want to have a workshop done in your area or your community member, want to have a workshop done based on herd health, calving preparations, lambing preparations, do get in contact with me and we can set something up. As far as conservation planning programs, if you need to get in contact regarding that, we do have our specialist, Shirley Toth. Her information is right there as well. But other than that, I just thank you all for joining us this evening. I hope that you take back a lot of great information from this presentation. I certainly do. It's always a pleasure to have Dr. Speckman to be on here and share with a lot of great resources that he's been working on for countless of hours. So if you want to see more of that, like at the RAM assessment, let me know because I'm sure we can set something up. I just want to say thank you everyone for coming on in here and I hope you guys have a good rest of your night. So to begin, we are known as the Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project. In short, we're called the NSA Project, and my slides are not working. That's great. But to carry on, we are funded by the USDA Outreach and Assistance for Native Farmers and Ranchers and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers program. I am not sure why my screen is not working this time, but I'm just going to go ahead and follow through. But our main goals are to help producers with resources to help them improve their operations, both profitability and sustainability. We deliver workshops based on the reviews that we gather from producers, such as evaluations that we provide after all of our presentations, both webinars and workshops. And we also as well share livestock management practices during cattle, sheep, and maybe goat cycles. So currently we have been conducting workshops in person on livestock record keeping, sheep and goat vaccination, cattle marketing, and more. So during these workshops and webinars, we are always appreciative to our project partners, both the NA College Land Grant and our NMSU CES specialists, such as Casey here too, to give us insight in their research and their projects that they've been working on for hours and hours to give you these resources to you guys as producers. And after our webinars, I will be happy to share with you all our this month's activities. what we have planned for workshops and webinars as well. So stay tuned for that. Not to mention, we do have a conservation planning program we offer that's in collaborative effort with Diné College Land Grant Office. You see their logos right here. These are all our project partners. One of them, our big project partner, is Diné College Land Grant. You see their logo all on our workshops, platform and webinars. They do host some of our webinars too as well, but majority of our in-person workshops too. We assist farmers and ranchers with helping them develop a basic conservation plan. So most of you may have already known this, and I see some people on here that actually partaked in some of our conservation planning programs in our group workshops, both farming and rangeland related. So I can explain that more in depth at the end of tonight's presentation. Today is just kind of in the beginning. I just want to give you guys an introduction to who we are. But if you guys are interested in the conservation planning program, I'll be happy to share a lot more information with you directly. Another goal of ours is to increase our producers' knowledge of USDA programs. So I'm sure all of you are well aware of the local programs here that NRCS and FSA programs offer. So we host virtual resource fairs. Those of you that have been here and been following us for over past couple years now, you know that we host virtual fairs. Last year, we had a USDA and NNDA. Those of you that are not aware of NNDA, it's known as the Navajo Nation Department of Agriculture. So they have their own programs such as the Agriculture Infrastructure Fund, and they have a little bit more projects within that department. So we have speakers from either Northern Agency or Eastern Agency to provide presentations on what local programs that NRCS and FSA have to offer and how you can apply for that, both for ranchers and farmers. And if you're looking to apply for forage, drought loss assistance, crop disaster assistance, I mean, definitely all that will be talked about during our resource fairs. And lastly, our goal is to help increase local food production in areas that we serve. And that is McKinley County, San Juan, and Cibola County. Those of you that are on here all the time, you've seen our webinars as far as garden-related projects. COPE, which is Community Outreach and Patient Empowerment. One of their logos here. Ms. Carol Palmer, who has been a great help in providing a lot of great information. She delivered food preservation, garden planning, seed selection. We also had Daryl Yazzie from Diné College Land Grant Extension. He's an extension agent that touched base on garden soil amendments. And Dr. Walker from NMSU delivering on spring vegetable gardening and more. So we share a lot of our specialists to provide these information for you guys, so that way you're up to date with a lot of what's going on now. And currently we're providing insight on gardening in person, mostly in Crown Point area, but we hope to expand in several other areas as well. In establishing gardening projects in schools and hopefully senior centers and individual family gardens.